I pushed open the bedroom door, expecting nothing more than a brief moment of calm after a long, exhausting day. I had just returned from work, my body sore and my mind heavy with stress. But instead of the comforting quiet I needed, I encountered something unexpected. Louisa, my wife of 14 years, was seated on the bed, a silk robe barely clinging to her shoulders. Her phone was propped up in front of her, and she was giggling, light-hearted and flirtatious. The sound grated on me. Immediately something felt off. I took a step forward, and then I saw the screen. It was Adam, my best friend, his face filling the video call. A smug grin spread across his face, a grin I'd recognized for years, but now twisted in a way that made me feel sick. My blood ran cold, and the room seemed to close in around me as I watched them, their laughter echoing in my mind. She didn't notice me at first, sitting there with her chestnut hair cascading over her shoulder, twirling a strand like a teenager on a date. My mind raced, struggling to understand what was happening, trying to process the betrayal unfolding right before me. What the hell is going on? The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. Rage boiled within me, barely contained. Louisa looked up, not shocked or ashamed, no. She looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like I'd interrupted something private. Her lips curved into a taunting smile. "Oh, please. He's my lover," she sneered, not even attempting to cover herself. "Can you respect my privacy and get the __ out now?" Her voice dripped with disdain, hitting me like a slap to the face. I'm showing Adam my stretching exercises. I stood there, frozen, trying to process her words as my heart hammered in my chest, and for a second, the world tilted. Adam, my best friend. My wife. 14 years of marriage, believing we were partners. How long had this been going on? "So I'm just a paycheck to you," the words came out strangled, as though my throat was tightening around the bitter truth. My own voice sounded foreign, filled with desperation I hated but couldn't contain. I needed answers. I needed to hear her say it. Louisa laughed, a harsh sound that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. She stood, the silk robe slipping further, a deliberate move meant to taunt me. Her gaze was icy, her face void of any warmth or guilt. "Bingo," she said with a smirk, her tone mocking. 14 years of pretending to be the loving wife. What a joke. She laughed louder, the sound bouncing off the walls like a nightmare I couldn't escape. Her eyes gleamed with something I couldn't name, something cruel. She was enjoying this. My mind reeled, retracing the year's holidays, anniversaries, quiet evenings together. Had it all been a lie? I felt nauseous, as if I'd been living someone else's life, a fool in a story I never knew existed. I stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger in front of me. Then Adam's voice broke through, sharp and full of arrogance. "You, man, can't handle a real woman. She's been mine all along." His smirk deepened with the casual confidence of someone who thought he'd won. "Get lost, buddy." In that instant, something snapped inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was the crushing weight of betrayal, the sting of humiliation, and years of bottled-up resentment. I felt heat rise in my chest, my muscles tensing, fists clenching. I had trusted both of them, shared everything with them, and this was how they repaid me. I lunged forward, snatching Louisa's phone from her hand. She cried out in surprise, but I didn't care. The phone felt flimsy in my grip, and before I knew it, I smashed it against the wall. It shattered, pieces scattering across the floor like shards of glass, mirroring the broken state of my marriage. The sound was oddly satisfying, a small moment of control in a situation spiraling out of it. Louisa screamed, clutching her robe to cover herself, but I ignored her. My attention was on Adam's frozen, smirking face on the broken screen. "Good. Let him witness the havoc he'd caused. You think this is funny?" I growled, turning back to her, my voice shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "You think I'm going to let you humiliate me in my own home?" Louisa's eyes widened, but not with fear. She looked defiant, clinging to whatever power she believed she still had. "What are you going to do, James? Cry about it?" "You're pathetic." Her words cut, but in that moment, they also cleared my mind. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to plead. This ended here and now. Without thinking, I grabbed her arm. She yelped, this time out of real fear, as I dragged her toward the door. "James, stop," she screamed, trying to pull free, but I was done with the lies, done with the manipulation. I stayed silent as I dragged her to the front door, disregarding her protests and pleas. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, her voice frantic. You can't just throw me out." Ignoring her words, I shoved her out, and the cold night air hit her as she stumbled, clutching her robe tightly around herself, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, she looked genuinely frightened and vulnerable. But I felt nothing. She had stripped away any compassion I might have had left. "You belong out there," I spat, my voice sounding unfamiliar, cold. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the house. I stood there in the silence for a moment, my chest heaving with the remnants of my anger. I stared at the closed door, questioning if I'd made a mistake or if I should have handled it differently. But no, I realized I'd done exactly what was needed. I had taken back control. And this was only the start. What I planned next would be beyond anything I'd imagined. After Louisa was out, the house fell into an eerie stillness. I returned to the bedroom, looking around at the scene: the shattered phone, the bed where I had spent a decade of my life with someone I thought I knew. My breath came in quick bursts, my chest still tight with the intensity of the moment. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing through everything that had led to this. Her betrayal wasn't just a casual affair, it was a slap in the face to everything I had built, everything I had believed in. 14 years of my life discarded as if they meant nothing. The sting of humiliation settled deeper, and my hands trembled not from fear, but from adrenaline. I wasn't considering forgiveness or any kind of reconciliation. The only thought that filled my mind was how to make them both pay. Louisa, with her smug smile and careless indifference, and Adam, who dared to betray and mock me in my own home. I stood up and began pacing, my mind racing faster than I could keep up. They thought they could humiliate me and walk away untouched. No, I was going to ensure they faced the full weight of their actions. The fury within me twisted into something darker, more controlled. This wasn't just revenge, it was going to be monumental. Nuclear, I muttered, as the plan began to form. Confronting or yelling at them wouldn't suffice, it would be temporary and meaningless. I needed to dismantle their lives the way they had torn apart mine. I moved over to the desk, yanked open my laptop, and began typing. First on my list was Adam. I knew him better than most people after all. We had been close friends for years, during which he had shared more than he should have. Business deals that weren't entirely legal, favors he owed to dangerous contacts. I smirked grimly. His weaknesses were right there, waiting to be exploited. I began digging through the company directories, our shared contacts, and mutual connections. Adam had been expanding his business over the past few years, taking risks, leveraging himself with clients who weren't exactly reputable. His entire livelihood depended on keeping those relationships steady and under the radar. One wrong move, and everything he had built could collapse. Scrolling through his business network, I spotted several names that jumped out, people who wouldn't hesitate to abandon him if they sensed his business was in danger. I jotted down their names, planning whom to contact first. A strategy was forming: I'd feed his competitors enough dirt to undermine his deals. Adam's history was full of secrets that could destroy his reputation overnight. He thought he was untouchable, but he didn't realize his success was built on a fragile foundation, and I was about to pull the bottom card. Hours passed as I gathered emails, contracts, and conversations I had been part of over the years. I had enough to plant doubts in the minds of his clients, and soon enough, rumors would spread, tightening the walls around him. But I wasn't done yet. I closed the browser, leaning back in my chair. Adam wasn't the only one who needed to face consequences. Louisa had her own skeletons, ones she thought she'd hidden from me. She hadn't just played the role of the perfect wife for show, she'd actively deceived me. Separate bank accounts, secret investments. I had known about them for a while but had stayed silent because I'd trusted her. That trust was gone now, as was my restraint. Logging into our shared accounts, I transferred funds into places Louisa couldn't access. Then I accessed the account she assumed I didn't know about, a hidden offshore one she had been building in secret. I drained it completely, moving the money to a secure location she'd never find. Every dollar she thought she had tucked away was now out of her reach. A grim smile crossed my face. Louisa had always thought she was clever, that I'd never figure out her schemes. But I'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. And now, with her life collapsing around her, she'd have nothing left. Next, I turned to her reputation. Louisa was obsessed with appearances, always ensuring everyone believed she was flawless, the ideal wife, friend, and professional. Exposing her affair wouldn't just embarrass her, it would destroy the image she'd carefully crafted. I spent the next hour drafting an email, concise and direct, with a few photos she'd sent Adam attached. The list of recipients was extensive: our mutual friends, her colleagues, her family. By the time they finished reading, they'd know exactly who Louisa truly was. Without a second thought, I hit send. Leaning back, I felt a strange sense of relief as the tension started to leave my body. This wasn't about revenge alone, it was about reclaiming control. They had both made their decisions to deceive and betray me, and now they would deal with the fallout. A notification buzzed on my phone. It was a message from Adam. My pulse quickened, but I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the screen, wondering if he had any inkling of what was about to unfold. He likely didn't. He was too self-assured, too convinced that he'd already won, to realize the ground beneath him was about to collapse. I opened the message, short and smug, just as I expected. "Hey man, let's talk. No hard feelings, right? We can work something out, can't we? Remember, we're best friends." I clenched my jaw as anger flared up once more. No hard feelings? He actually had the nerve to suggest that after all he'd done. I set the phone down, refusing to answer. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of believing this was just some misunderstanding. No, this was war. The next morning, I started making calls. I reached out to Adam's biggest competitors, carefully sharing just enough information to get the ball rolling. By the end of the day, I knew the wheels were in motion. Soon, Adam would start receiving calls from clients backing out, investors withdrawing their support, all because of a few well-placed rumors. When I closed the laptop and walked to the window, the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, and a strange calm settled over me. The plan was underway now. All I had to do was wait. Louisa and Adam had taken everything from me: my trust, my dignity, my sense of security, but now I was reclaiming it, piece by piece. I would reduce their world to ashes, and when the dust settled, I'd be the one left standing. The days following Louisa's departure passed in a blur, filled with calculated silence and careful planning. I ignored all her desperate attempts to reach me: calls, messages, none of it mattered anymore. She was desperate, and I could tell, but I felt nothing. She had made her decision, and now it was my turn to make mine. The groundwork was already laid for the first phase of my plan. Adam's business, that carefully constructed empire he had spent years building, was about to collapse. I'd spent the past few nights reaching out to the right people: rival companies, clients he had failed to satisfy. Planting seeds of doubt was easy. I merely hinted that maybe Adam wasn't as reliable as he appeared. In the world of business, trust was everything, and people loved a juicy scandal. All it took was a few nudges, a couple of emails with sensitive information, and the wheels started to turn. 2 days later, Adam's number appeared on my screen. I wasn't surprised. I ignored it, smiling to myself, knowing he was likely in a state of panic. Soon after, messages began arriving, each one more desperate than the last. "James, we need to talk. Hey man, some things are going down with clients. You wouldn't know anything about that. Would you come on, man? Pick up the phone." I ignored them all, savoring the satisfaction as cracks began to show in his perfect little world. I could picture him now, pacing his office, trying to understand how everything was crumbling. But Adam's downfall wasn't enough, not yet. After I threw Louisa out, she had been quiet, but I knew her too well to believe it would last. Sure enough, a few days later she showed up at the house. I watched through the window as she stood outside, pacing in the driveway, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt attempting to call me again. But it wouldn't work. I had blocked her number the night I threw her out, and I had no interest in hearing her apologies or excuses. After a few minutes, she gave up on calling and stormed up to the door, pounding on it with a force that made the wood rattle. I remained still, watching her through the narrow slit in the blinds. She was yelling now, her voice muffled but loud enough for me to catch fragments. "James, open the door. We need to talk about this." I stayed where I was. "I know you're in there. You can't just ignore me forever." She was wrong. I could, and I would. Eventually, she gave up, stomping back to her car and speeding away in frustration. I exhaled slowly, feeling a small sense of relief as her engine faded into the distance. But this was only the start. I knew Louisa wouldn't give up so easily, and I was counting on it. Her weakness was her vanity. For years, she had meticulously crafted an image of flawless life portrayed on social media, friendships with the right people, and a reputation for being the perfect wife. She thrived on admiration, envy, and being the center of attention. I was about to tear all of that down. I had the photos, the ones she had sent to Adam, provocative and intimate. At first, I couldn't even stand to look at them, but now they were the key to her undoing. I knew exactly where to send them. I crafted a few anonymous emails, striking the right tone, not overly aggressive, but clear that these images weren't meant for public eyes. I attached the photos and sent them to just the right people: her closest friends, coworkers, and a few influential figures in her social circle who loved to gossip. Louisa's world revolved around appearances, and once these photos surfaced, that world would collapse. The first response came within hours. One of her friends forwarded the email back to me, likely thinking she was doing me a favor by alerting me to this scandal. I could almost feel the excitement in her message. "James, I thought you should see this. I don't know what's going on, but these pictures, they're everywhere. I'm so sorry I didn't reply, there was no need. The damage was already done." Over the next few days, I watched from the sidelines as Louisa's carefully built life began to fall apart. Her friends started distancing themselves one by one, and social media buzzed with whispers and speculation. She had always taken pride in being part of the in crowd, but now she was on the outside looking in. Her messages to me grew increasingly desperate, the tone shifting from anger to pleading. "James, please, can we just talk? I'm sorry, okay? I never meant for this to happen." But I didn't answer. She had made her choice, and now she'd have to live with it. A few days later, Adam's business hit its breaking point. He lost 2 major clients, individuals I had ensured would hear the right whispers about his questionable practices. His frantic calls became more frequent, but I continued to ignore them, watching from a distance as the once confident man began to crumble under the weight of his own lies. Soon he was forced to lay off employees, sell assets, and scramble for any deal to keep his business afloat. But the final strike came when I sent an anonymous tip to the authorities. Adam had skirted the line of legality for years, and it hadn't taken much to tip off authorities to his shady business practices. It wasn't long before an investigation was underway, and word spread through the industry like wildfire. I sat back and watched as everything he had worked to build went up in flames. The respect he once held in the business world quickly turned to infamy. His name became synonymous with scandal. His career was finished, and there was no coming back from it. As for Louisa, she continued trying to salvage the remnants of her reputation, but it was a hopeless endeavor. The photos had done their job, and the people she had once considered her friends had abandoned her. Her social media fell silent, and eventually, her calls and messages to me stopped altogether. I could only imagine the shame she must have felt, knowing that everyone she valued had seen her true self. Watching them both unravel brought a dark satisfaction. They had taken everything from me, but now I had taken everything from them. They had assumed they could betray me and escape unscathed. They were wrong. The best part was, neither of them had a clue that I had been orchestrating it all from the shadows. One quiet evening, a faint knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts as I sat in my office going over some paperwork. No one had come by in days, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I stood up slowly, assuming it was a forgotten delivery. But when I opened the door, what I saw was anything but routine. Louisa, the woman who had always held her head high, proud and composed, stood there as a broken mess. Her once impeccable appearance was gone. Her face was streaked with mascara-stained tears, her hair was tangled and wild, and her clothes looked as if she'd grabbed whatever was closest. This wasn't the Louisa I had known for years. This was a woman who had lost everything. "James," she whispered, her voice cracking. She took a step forward, but I stood still, my expression unreadable. "Please, we need to talk." I said nothing, simply watching her. There was no satisfaction in this moment, no pleasure in seeing her like this. I had already moved on from the anger and hurt. All I saw in front of me was the inevitable result of her choices. She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "I made a mistake, James. A terrible mistake." I raised an eyebrow, remaining silent as she sank to her knees on the doorstep, her desperation clear. "Please," she begged through sobs. "I was foolish. I was wrong. I don't know what I was thinking." Her words were interrupted by another wave of tears. "Please, let's fix this. We can work through it. I'll do anything. Just please." Her desperation echoed in the night, but it didn't affect me. It was difficult to reconcile this broken woman with the one who had once mocked me, laughing in my face as she flaunted her affair. "Get up," I said flatly, my voice cold. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion. I said, "Get up," I repeated more firmly. Slowly, she got to her feet, unsteady and unsure, like a child waiting for punishment. She attempted to step closer, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I don't know what you think is going to happen here, Louisa," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "But let me be clear, you didn't just make a mistake. This wasn't an accident or a lapse in judgment. You made a choice. For 14 years, you lied to me, betrayed me, and disrespected our marriage, and now you expect me to forgive you as if it meant nothing." Her lips trembled, fresh tears spilling down her face. I know I hurt you, James, but I love you. I've always loved you, she pleaded, stepping closer, her voice shaking. I don't know why I did what I did, but we can fix this. We can start over. Please, just give me another chance. I couldn't help but let out a laugh, a bitter, humorless laugh. Love, I asked, shaking my head. Is that what you call this? If this is your idea of love, then I don't want any part of it. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. Please, James, she whispered, her voice cracking once more. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll prove it to you. Just don't throw everything away, throw everything away. I repeated, incredulous. You're the one who threw everything away, Louisa. You threw us away, our marriage, the life we built together. I took a step back, shaking my head in disbelief. I gave you everything, my trust, my love, my loyalty, and this is how you repay me? By betraying me with my best friend. She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised a hand to silence her. I don't want your apologies, I said firmly. I don't want your excuses, and I certainly don't want you back. You made your bed, Louisa, and now you'll have to lie in it. Her face crumpled again, and she dropped to her knees for the second time, sobbing uncontrollably. She clung to my pant leg, her grip desperate. Please, she begged, her voice barely audible through the sobs. Please, James, don't leave me like this. I'll do anything, just. Please. I pulled my leg back, stepping out of her reach. It's over, Louisa, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. You don't get to come back from this, not after everything you've done. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. But I love you, she whispered again, as if saying it enough times might make it true. I shook my head slowly. No, Louisa, you don't love me. You never did. You loved the idea of me. You loved what I provided, the security, the stability, but you never loved me. Leaning against the door frame, I crossed my arms over my chest. Because if you did love me, you wouldn't have done what you did. She wiped at her tear-streaked face with trembling hands, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know why I did it. I was confused, I was lost, I scoffed. Don't insult me, Louisa. You knew exactly what you were doing. Silence fell between us. She remained on the ground, kneeling before me, broken and defeated. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt pity for her, almost. But then I remembered the way she had looked at Adam. The way she had mocked me as if I were insignificant. That was the true Louisa, the one who took everything I had given her and discarded it without a second thought. Finally, I turned and walked back into the house. Goodbye, Louisa, I said, my voice calm and final. I closed the door behind me, leaving her outside in the cold, her sobs echoing in the silence. Just like that, I was free. News travels fast in tight circles, and Adam's downfall was no different. It didn't take long for me to hear whispers about his business crumbling. The empire he had built over the years was collapsing under the weight of my carefully orchestrated sabotage. Clients he believed were loyal jumped ship as rumors about his shady dealings and financial problems circulated. I had ensured that the right people had just enough information to question his integrity. In the cutthroat business world, that was all it took. In those first few weeks, he attempted to reach out to me. His messages began casually, as if we were still on friendly terms. James, let's grab a drink, man. We can talk this through. I deleted them without hesitation. As time went on, his messages became increasingly desperate. James, please, I know things got messed up, but we've been friends for too long to let this ruin everything. Can we fix this? I didn't reply. There was nothing to fix. I had no sympathy for him. This was the man who had smiled in my face for years while betraying our friendship in the worst possible way. He treated our bond like it was nothing, all for the sake of indulging in his affair with Louisa. He had shown no remorse, no hesitation in flaunting his relationship with my wife when he thought I was powerless to stop him. Now, he was the one who felt powerless, watching his world fall apart piece by piece. Still, I wasn't prepared for how quickly Adam would unravel. The next time I encountered him, a few weeks after the initial fallout, he was barely recognizable. I had gone out to a local cafe to grab a coffee, one of my favorite spots. As I stood in line, waiting for my order, I heard someone call my name from across the room. I turned and, to my surprise, saw Adam sitting at a table near the window. But this was not the confident, cocky man I had known for years. This was a shadow of his former self. His usual pristine appearance was gone. His clothes were wrinkled, as if he had thrown them on without care, and his hair was unkempt. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. The arrogance that had defined him was replaced by something hollow and broken. James, he called again, standing up from the table and walking toward me, his voice hoarse and his steps uncertain. I didn't respond. I turned back to the counter to grab my coffee. But Adam wasn't willing to let it go. He approached me, desperation clear on his face. "Come on, man, we need to talk," he said, his voice pleading. "I know things got messed up, but we can fix this. You and me, we've been through too much to let this ruin everything." I finally turned to face him, meeting his eyes with a cold stare. "Fix this," I echoed, my voice low. "There's nothing left to fix, Adam." He flinched at the chill in my tone but didn't back down. "Look, I know I screwed up. I realize what I did was wrong, but I was going through some stuff. Louisa and it just happened. I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Adam, you had an affair with my wife for years, and now, after everything has fallen apart, you want to act like it was some kind of mistake." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "You made your choice," I continued, my voice growing more intense with each word. "You chose to betray me, to lie to my face while you were sleeping with my wife behind my back. You showed no remorse then, and now that your life is in shambles, you think an apology is going to fix everything." His shoulders slumped, the weight of my words hitting him like a ton of bricks. "I'm sorry, James," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen, I thought. I thought we could still be friends." I let out a bitter laugh. "Friends? You think we can still be friends after what you did? You destroyed any chance of that the moment you decided to betray me. There's no going back from this for a moment." He just stood there, staring at me with a pale, drawn face. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the realization that he had lost everything and had no one left to turn to. His business was in ruins, his reputation shattered, and now the last person who could have helped him had cut him off. "I've lost everything," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "My business, my money. It's all gone." I felt no pity for him, none at all. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with your best friend's wife," I said coldly. He flinched again, and for a moment I thought he might lash out or say something to defend himself. Instead, he just stood there, looking completely defeated. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said softly, his voice breaking. "No one ever does," I replied, turning away from him. "But actions have consequences, Adam. You just have to live with them." I started to walk away, but Adam reached out, grabbing my arm in a final act of desperation. "Please, James, I don't know what to do. I've got nothing left. I can't lose everything." I pulled my arm free from his grip, giving him one last cold stare. "You've already lost everything, Adam. You just didn't realize it until now." With that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving him standing there alone and broken. As I stepped out into the cool air, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't exactly happiness, but it was something close. Adam had taken so much from me, my trust, my friendship, my marriage, and now he had nothing left. He had finally hit rock bottom, with no one there to help him back up. I didn't look back as I walked away. Adam was no longer part of my life, no longer a weight dragging me down. He had made his bed, just like Louisa, and now he would have to lie in it. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom. I had been consumed by their betrayal for so long, but now that it was finally over, I could begin to move forward. Both of them were out of my life, and their suffering was of their own making. As far as I was concerned, they could continue to suffer. For all I cared, they deserved nothing less. The first few months after everything fell apart felt surreal. I had spent so much time focused on betrayal and revenge that when it was all over, I experienced a strange emptiness. However, that emptiness didn't last long. Gradually, I began to piece my life back together. The anger that had driven me for so long started to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of victory. I wasn't proud of how far I had gone, but I felt no regret either. Adam and Louisa had gotten what they deserved, and now it was time for me to move on. Initially, the thought of meeting someone new felt impossible. I hadn't realized how much Louisa's infidelity had affected my self-worth until I found myself hesitating to trust anyone again. But fate has a peculiar way of surprising you. I met Charlotte at a coffee shop not far from my office. I wasn't looking for anything serious, I was just trying to adjust to my new normal. She stood in line ahead of me, struggling with her order while balancing a stack of files under one arm. "Let me help you with that," I offered, stepping forward to catch the files before they fell. She smiled gratefully, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment before she turned back to the barista. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft yet confident. "I'm still getting used to juggling work and coffee." There was something about her that made me pause. It wasn't just her warm and genuine smile, which I hadn't seen in a long time. It was the calmness she exuded, something grounding. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of curiosity instead of bitterness. "No problem," I replied, placing the files on the counter. "Coffee and work don't always mix well," she chuckled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Tell me about it." We exchanged small talk while we waited for our drinks. Her name was Charlotte. She worked as a consultant for a tech firm and had just moved to the city. There was no hint of the drama or deceit that had surrounded my life for so long. She was refreshingly normal, and I found myself wanting to learn more about her. Over the next few weeks, we bumped into each other at the coffee shop several times. What started as casual conversations and shared laughs eventually led me to ask her out for dinner. I wasn't sure where things were heading, but I was open to seeing where it would lead. Our first date was simple, no grand gestures or fancy restaurants. We sat in a quiet corner of a small Italian place, talking for hours about everything from work to our favorite movies. Charlotte had a way of putting me at ease, making me forget about the past without even trying. It felt natural, not forced. As the evening progressed, I realized something that shook me. I wasn't waiting for her to hurt me. For the first time since Louise's betrayal, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, expecting the worst. With Charlotte, I could breathe again. As weeks turned into months, our relationship deepened. I found myself letting go of the walls I had built around my heart. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when old doubts crept back in, but Charlotte was patient. She never pressured me and never asked for more than I could give. She understood that I was healing and provided me the space to do so. One evening, we sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with soft hues of pink and orange, and the cool breeze carried the scent of autumn. Charlotte leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder, and for a moment everything felt right. "You've been quiet tonight," she said gently. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to articulate my thoughts. "Just thinking," I finally replied, "about how far things have come." She shifted slightly, looking up at me with kind, understanding eyes. "It's been a journey, hasn't it?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, it has. There was a time when I didn't think I'd ever get past the betrayal, the anger. It consumed me for so long." Charlotte didn't respond, she simply listened. That was another thing I loved about her. She didn't try to fix me or offer empty platitudes. She allowed me to work through my thoughts at my own pace. I spent so much time planning my revenge, I continued, my voice quieter now. And when I finally did it, I thought it would be enough, but it wasn't. Not really. It felt good to watch them fall apart, but after that I realized revenge wasn't what I needed. I needed peace. I needed to move on. Charlotte nodded, her hand resting gently on my arm. "And you did," she said softly. "You moved on. You rebuilt your life." "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "You've shown me that trust isn't something I have to fear anymore, and that there are second chances." Her smile was warm as she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek. "I'm glad I could be a part of that," she whispered. "But you did the hard work, James. You made the choice to let go for a long time." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The weight that had burdened me for so long had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. In that moment I realized that I had won, not because I had destroyed Adam and Louisa's lives, but because I had taken back control of my own. I had built something new, something better with Charlotte, and it wasn't based on lies or betrayal. It was founded on trust, respect, and genuine love. "Do you ever think about them?" Charlotte asked after a while, her voice soft yet curious. I shook my head. "Not anymore," I said truthfully. "They're part of my past. They made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences." "I've moved on," she smiled, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "Good," she said, "because you deserve better." I looked down at her, feeling a warmth spread through me. For the first time in a long while, I believed her. I did deserve better, and I had found it. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, I wrapped my arm around Charlotte, pulling her closer. This was my new beginning, a fresh start, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking back, I was looking forward to a future full of possibilities. It was an ordinary afternoon when the letter arrived. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting streaks of light across my desk as I sat there finishing some work. The envelope was plain, and the handwriting looked familiar. I stared at it for a moment, my pulse quickening in an old, reflexive way. Louisa. I hadn't heard from her in months. The last time I saw her was during her desperate plea for forgiveness, and now she was trying to reach me again, this time in writing. For a split second, I considered tossing the envelope straight into the trash without opening it, but curiosity pulled at me. Before I knew it, I was holding the letter in my hands, carefully unfolding it. Her words were chosen with care, clearly calculated. She wrote about how her life had fallen apart after I cut her off and left her to face the consequences of her actions. The tone was desperate and pleading, but it was laced with a strange sense of entitlement, as if she still believed that I owed her something. James, I've lost everything. Adam's gone, my friends, my job, my reputation. It's all crumbled. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I've suffered too. I need to talk to you one last time. Please, if you have any mercy left, meet me and let me apologize face to face. As I read her words, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Once, the thought of her suffering would have given me a sad satisfaction, perhaps a sense of justice. But now, all I felt was indifference. Louisa's downfall was inevitable, a direct result of her choices, and I no longer needed her apologies. The wreckage of her life didn't concern me anymore. I leaned back in my chair, turning the letter over in my hands. The weight of everything that had happened hung in the air for a moment. Louisa had caused me immense pain, shattering the life we had built together, and now she was reaching out, perhaps trying to regain some semblance of closure for herself, not for me. But I had already found closure. I had rebuilt my life. Louisa's suffering was no longer my concern, nor was it my victory. She was merely a ghost haunting a chapter of my past that I had long since closed. I no longer needed to hear her apologies or excuses. I had won not by destroying her, but by reclaiming my own happiness. I crumpled the letter in my hand, the sound of the paper twisting and folding oddly satisfying. There was no need to respond or engage in her continued spiral into self-pity. As I stood up, I walked over to the fireplace, tossing the crumpled letter into the flames. The fire caught quickly, the edges curling as the letter blackened, reduced to ash in seconds. Charlotte walked into the room just as I watched the last of the paper disintegrate. She looked at me curiously, sensing something different about my mood. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping closer and resting her hand lightly on my arm. I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me. "Just an old ghost trying to come back," I said, turning to face her. "But it's gone now." Her eyes searched mine for a moment, and then she nodded. "Good," she said softly, leaning into me. "You deserve better." I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I have better," I replied, kissing the top of her head, and I meant it. Charlotte wasn't a rebound or a way to fill the void left by Louisa. She was a second chance at genuine happiness, the kind of happiness I didn't know I was capable of experiencing again. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky fade into twilight, I thought about the letter one last time. In a way, it represented the final loose end of a story I had already concluded. Louisa had destroyed herself long before I played any part in it. She had chosen Adam, chosen her path, and now she was living with the consequences. The fact that she had lost everything didn't matter to me anymore. I had let go of that part of my life. As the stars began to dot the sky, Charlotte glanced over at me, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice gentle but inquisitive. I smiled and shook my head slightly. "Just thinking about how far I've come," I replied, glancing at her. "How much has changed?" She leaned in closer, resting her head on my shoulder. "Change can be good," she said quietly. "Sometimes it leads you exactly where you're supposed to be." I pondered that for a moment. She was right. All the pain and betrayal had led me here, to this peaceful moment with someone who truly cared for me. Louisa's downfall wasn't my victory, my happiness was, and that realization was worth more than any revenge could ever be. "I don't regret anything," I said, my voice low but firm. "Not anymore." Charlotte looked up at me, her smile soft and understanding. "I'm glad," she whispered, leaning in to kiss me gently. "Because you deserve peace, James." As I held her close, watching the night sky unfold above us, I realized that the final twist in my story wasn't about Louisa's suffering or Adam's downfall. The real twist was that I had found happiness again, not in revenge but in moving forward. I had taken control of my life, rebuilt it on my terms, and now I was living proof that there was life and love after betrayal. The past was where it belonged in the ashes of that letter, and the future, well, the future was wide open.